Hello guys, welcome back. This is my first loudspeaker review, and I chose to review and talk about this Fyne Audio F501 model because it really made an impression. So the brand Fyne Audio is relatively new. They're from Scotland, and they are actually, even though the company is new, they're actually formed by a bunch of guys that worked for Tannoy. Now, I've read some articles that back in 2015, or maybe it was 16, when Tannoy was bought over by a holding group, the new owners decided to shut down manufacturing in Scotland and move it to China. So this propelled some of the folks that worked in Tannoy to start out a business on their own in order to keep most of the manufacturing and the high-end audio knowledge, know-how and knowledge within Scotland. So I think that's a pretty impressive and inspiring story. Now their F1 series and the F500 series are in fact made in the UK, but their more affordable 300 series and the 500 series are actually made in China, and that's the way of keeping prices competitive, I suppose. But their name, Fyne Audio, is I've seen some videos with interviews about them. They picked their name after Loch Fyne, which is close to the factory and where they're from. So let's talk through some of the specifics of the F501.
Now, looking at the speaker itself with the grills off will remind some of us folks about Tannoy, of course, specifically their XT6F and the XT8F model. I personally owned the XT8F, and while I liked the Tannoy XT8F's immediacy, dynamics, and resolution, I simply struggled with room placement. The bass output was really hard to tame. Also, while it might appear that these are very similar, they're considerably different, and the devils and the details here. So let's start with first the ISO flare, which is their coaxial drive unit. And the ISO flare is also referring to the design of the waveguide. Essentially, it's a coaxially mounted compression driver, a titanium 1-inch compression driver with a first order high pass crossover at about 1.7 kilohertz, and the low pass into the 6-inch mid bass woofer here is a second order low pass. While concentric drivers are not necessarily new, and I've been a Tannoy thing for a very long time, the uniqueness here is the ISO flare waveguide. Also the second bass driver here is also 6 inches. It starts at 250 hertz and goes down below with room boundary down to 36 hertz, specified at -6 dB, which is typically the room gain boundary. Next, let's talk about the Fyne flute. It's a sort of a discontinuous design of the surround. The company says that conventional surrounds add resonance to the driver at certain frequencies, and this design reduces the distortion caused by these said resonances. Then we have the bass tracks. So the difference between this is one of the big differences between the XT6F and 8F models versus the 501. This bass tracks actually has a vertical port coming from the chambers of the woofers, and it flares down and disperses what would normally be a plain propagated sound wave into a 360-degree sound wave. So that helps greatly into integrating a source, a speaker with big bass output into a room without muddying the rest of the frequency response. Curved front baffle and back baffle. So non-parallel surfaces help with reducing internal reflections to the back of the drivers and help with stiffening the cabinet as well. So here's another cool part. Fyne Audio recommends you leave the grills off for critical listening. But the cool part is the grills are magnetically attached. Nothing new about that. A lot of speakers have that. But when you're not listening, you peel them off and you just stick them at the back. They have magnets at the back too. While it's a simple execution and implementation, it's the design thinking that's really cool. Nominal impedance is specified at 8 ohms. And I think I mentioned before, the low frequency is spec'd at 36 hertz at 6 dB, which is typical room boundary conditions. At the back, you have nice quality binding posts that support wiring as well. Okay, sound quality impressions. If you're like me and have tube amps, I drove these with both tube and solid state. But I have a Jolita tube amp with both a 4 ohm and 8 ohm taps. I urge you to experiment if you have such a tube amp with 8 and 4 ohm taps to see which gives you the best sound, because I found the 4 ohm tap to sound better, especially at lower volumes, which might be indicative that the impedance curve of the speaker, although specified nominally at 8, which is averaged at 8, the bass frequencies might be dipping a little below or at 4 ohms. So let me talk through some of the albums that I played and really enjoyed here. This one is called Homemade Ice Cream by Tony Joe White. This is an analog production pressing. Really nice pressing. It's a very intimate setting. There's the track called Homemade Ice Cream, which is in side 2, and it's an instrumental track, but the bass and the guitar strings are just beautifully recorded, and this speaker brings out the details really well, even at low volumes. There is a lot of air captured in this recording, and the imaging is fantastic. The rendition of depth in this recording is fantastic. There is also a really cool song called Preacher Man. It is pretty backwoods Preacher Man. That's what the name of the song is. And that is also, it's a bit more paced than Homemade Ice Cream, but the vocals in that are awesome, and this really brings out the high quality recording on this album. Next, let's talk through Miles Davis's Sorcerer. This is a original master recording by Mobile Fidelity. Again, a lot of bass in this album, and there's a lot of subtle bass in this album. There's a lot of bass that has subtlety in this album, and there's a lot of instruments also, and the mid-range from these 501s are simply fantastic. Very clear, resolution is excellent, and the soundstage is fantastic. There's one more album I want to talk about, which is Ahmad Jamal. The album's called Genetic Walk, and there is this track here on side B called Don't Ask My Neighbor, and you can see the prowess of imaging and the tone density that this speaker is capable of. Also the resolution. There's a massive violins playing at one section of the song, and it is captured so well, and the bass in this track lays a foundation to the entire soundscape of that track, and the sound is so well organized. And I'm not talking about increased volume levels, at low late night listening levels. This brings out all the detail, and as you turn the volume up when you can, there is just more clarity. The images just get bigger, and the bass is not overpowering. I had them set about a foot and a half from the front wall and about 2 feet from the side walls. I've pulled it out because of the better lighting for this video, but otherwise I didn't have it too far from the front wall, like I said. So maybe about 18 inches. Again, guys, even with the constraints of a smaller room, I think these will shine really well, and the bass will not overpower and destroy the other aspects of sound staging, imaging, the depth perception, or the mid-range. I think it is a very cohesive sound, and I think the technology these guys have put into this speaker really shows, and the finish too. I love this finish. There's also gloss finishes available. That's an extra upcharge, and but I personally like this dark wood finish and the grain that they have on this veneer. So that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. This is the first of my speaker reviews. I'm hoping to add more speaker reviews as well as the other turntable and amplifier reviews that I've been talking about. So I hope you enjoyed this. Please subscribe. That would help me out a lot, and we'll be talking to you soon, very soon again. Thank you.